Very good. Thank you very much, Melanie. Welcome everybody to this coffee chat of the ILA. I'm Marjoline Droogleever Fortuyn. I'm a board member of the ILA and I'm the chair of the Remuneration and Nomination Committee. And I will be your host for the next 45 minutes or so. As you know, the ILA, the Luxembourg Directors Institute, aims at promoting the best practices for corporate governance in Luxembourg. And in these times of COVID, these challenging times, we have set up a number of coffee chats to keep everybody nevertheless informed and updated on new trends in corporate governance. And of course, remuneration of independent directors is a very important part of that. Today, I'm very happy to have with me Jean-Pascal Nepper of KPMG, a tax advisory partner of KPMG, and Laurence Lhote, tax partner of KPMG, mainly specialized in VAT. Both of them and KPMG in general have been instrumental in making this survey of the remuneration of independent directors that the ILA has this year made for the third time already. We also have with us Gabriela Nguyen-Groza, senior client partner at Korn Ferry in Luxembourg, who can give us some more information on remuneration of directors, not only in Luxembourg, but also in other countries, and trends that she and Korn Ferry see in the market, as of course Korn Ferry is also very much involved in finding and recruiting independent directors. So I'm very happy to have these speakers here with us today. A few house notes. The webinar is a discussion with the panelists, and of course you're very welcome to ask questions. The best is to ask questions via the chat function on Zoom, and then please put in the chat function a chat with everybody so that all of the panelists can see your questions and we can take them in the discussion or thereafter. The session is being recorded and will be made available afterwards online. And please stay on mute and use the chat function to pose your questions. So let's get started. So this year, for the third time, ILA and KPMG have made the survey on the remuneration of independent directors to give an indication of what is happening in the market in Luxembourg. Jean-Pascal, you've been very much involved in this. Perhaps you can give us a bit of information of how the survey was made, what the participants were to the survey, what the methodology was, and what are the first outcomes which you have seen in the survey.
Yes, thank you, Marjoline. Can you hear me well? Okay, good, excellent. Thank you and welcome everyone. So indeed, I'll explain to you a bit the methodology we use for the survey, also give you an overview of what's in the report and provide you some of the key insight. If Melanie, if you can move to the next slide, thank you. So how did we do this? So basically we use two sources of information to build our sample. The first source of information is us reaching out to organizations, to companies, asking them to share with us the remuneration data of their board and their board committees. And with 50 of them, so all Luxembourg based. And we reached out to independent non-executive directors, asking for remuneration data of all the mandates they hold. And then we put this data together, and at the end of the day, we get the figures you can see on the screen. That is 457 data for board mandates and 55 for board committee mandates. With regard to the second survey we did with ILA 3 years ago, this is the double of the sample. So it's a very positive feedback and response from the market to help us build these benchmarks. If you can go to the next slide, Melanie. Thank you. So as you will see later, this is the overview of what you will find in the survey. So this is a table of content, basically. So of course, there is a view on the participants' profile, both for the organization and for the independent non-executive directors. Of course, the most relevant are the remuneration data for board committees. Also a view on taxation, VAT, and Laurence will discuss this in a second. A view on the DNO as well, on the cost of the DNO. Then we have also asked questions with regard to the proportion of non-executive directors in boards and board committees, an assessment of their workload, also with a view from the companies and from the non-executive directors themselves, and a view of the volume of training. And finally, an idea of proportion on with regard to diversity. Thank you, Melanie. So, quick overview of the participants' profile. So this is for the companies survey. The type of organization you can see here on the screen are the ones that are among the 50. This is the breakdown of the sectors and organizations. You can see that it's mainly the financial sector, with banks being highly represented, but also management companies. On the next slide, you have a view on the participants' profile for the non-executive directors. So you can see that the great majority are Luxembourg-based. You can also see the age of the respondents, so basically between 51 and 60 years old, 56 being the average age. And as far as the gender is concerned, of course, disappointing figures, but unfortunately we are used to this, with a limited number of female participants and a larger number of male respondents. Some of the insights, and again, I won't go through, of course, the whole report, and I think you have the chance later to go through the report in detail. Just a few figures here. First question was asked was, are the non-exec compensated for their position in the boards? You can see that we have 24% no. Some of you might ask the question. This relates basically to answers coming from the companies, organizations, which are subsidiaries in Luxembourg of mother companies abroad. And these mother companies abroad tend to send some senior staff or senior executive from their mother company to attend and to be part of board in Luxembourg. And these are not necessarily compensated for their role. This is why you have this figure. We had the same figure in the last survey, so this is no surprise. For the ones that are being compensated, you can see that the majority, of course, of the type of compensation is director's fees or annual allowances, with no surprise. Yes, thank you. Just to give you a view on the remuneration data, this is a helicopter view for all the sectors together of all the board mandates we had collected. So it's very, very high level, but you can see where basically the figures lie. You can see that from basically the majority of the remuneration is between 10,000 and 50,000. If you add 20 plus 9 plus 8 plus 28, you get 2/3 of the sample, which is basically between those two ranges. And on the next slide, this is the same figures, but broken down by sector. It's not an easy to read graph because it's very heterogeneous. An easy one could be, if you go on the right-hand side, you can see the technology startups, which is below 10K on an annual basis, which again will come as no surprise. If you go to the left-hand side, you can see the banking institutions, where the 2/3 of them are between 25,000 and 100,000 on an annual basis. If you look, for instance, in management companies or investment vehicles, we are basically, if you can take the time to look at, for instance, the orange box, you can see 18 for management companies, 38 for investment vehicles. And if you go upwards, up to 50,000, so the red box, you can see that this is the majority of the sample data that range between 10 and 50 for these two particular types of organization. It's a very heterogeneous picture. I mean, the colors show, and the difficulty to read the graph show that it's very heterogeneous, depending, of course, on the organizations, on the country of origin, on the sector, of course, and on the non-executive profile, non-director profile, obviously. So all this put together, this is just a few insights of what you will find in the survey. And then maybe I'll hand over the floor back to you, Marjoline.
Thank you very much for this first information on the survey, indeed. And for everybody also important to know that the survey will be published today on the website of the ILA for the members of the ILA. So after this chat, you can have a look at, on the full survey, but this already gives a very good first idea of what's in there. Thank you very much, Jean-Pascal. Do we already have maybe questions, first questions on the chat? I believe I don't see any. No, okay. Then indeed, maybe some spotlight on VAT, Laurence. VAT is always a very complex matter, also for independent directors. Could you maybe very briefly bring to our memory again what the different regimes is for VAT for Luxembourg resident director, non-resident directors, directors who are directly invoicing their director's fees or via a company. So to bring it to our memory again.
Laurence, you are muted. We can't hear you. That's better.
There
okay.
you are.
sorry. Then 2017, this is a key year then for the VAT treatments. Why? Then it's true that before that year, then the VAT treatment applicable was not very clear. And based on different questions which were asked to the VAT authorities, then they decided then to take a position on that. And as from 2017, clearly they consider that the services rendered by a director, when we hear services, then fall within the scope of the VAT, and it means that in principle, then VAT should be applicable. The next question would be, does it mean that I need to charge the VAT on the services that I provide on my invoices? And the answer would be that depends. That depends on what? Okay, the first questions would be, are you resident in Luxembourg? If the answer is yes, then you are resident in Luxembourg, it means that the compliance obligations will be on your side and to correctly apply and the VAT treatments. It means that in principle, you should be requested to ask for a VAT registrations. Does it mean that you are going to charge the VAT on your invoice? Again, it will be, that depends. And it's not always easy then to know. Then that depends of what? First of all, then that depends on the amount of the turnover that you are going then to have, not with company, but globally regarding that activities. And if it exceeds 35,000 euro, and 35,000 euro, why that selling? Then the selling that this is selling for the small enterprise regime and the franchise regime, the franchise in French. Then if your remuneration globally, I insist on the word globally, then it's not a company, but globally, is below that ceiling, you will be obliged then to ask for VAT registrations, but on the invoice that you are going to issue, then you will put then the wording, then small enterprise regime, and the VAT will not be charged. Then this is the first case. The second case would be if I exceed that ceiling. And as soon as you are going to exceed that ceiling, then in principle, then VAT should be charged, and you will have compliance obligations as the completion of the VAT returns, which should be done on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, depending on the amount of the turnover that you are going to realize. There is an exception to that if you are, in fact, director of an investment fund. Why? Because the Luxembourg VAT authorities consider that if you are director of an investment fund, you are covered by a VAT exemptions, which is in fact the management of the investment fund as such.
Laurence, can I just interrupt you? Could you come a little bit closer to the mic, because it's difficult for the participants to hear you?
Oh, can I do?
Yeah, that is already better, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. I'm closer from from the left. Then I was. Then does it mean that you need to charge the VAT always? then if you are director of an investment fund, okay, in that case, the VAT authorities consider that in fact another VAT exemptions will be applicable. This is management of investment funds, Article 44(1)(d), and to be technical. And in that case, you will not be obliged to ask for VAT registrations, and your services will be covered by the VAT exemptions. Pay attention, one point is important, then that VAT exemption is only applicable for the director of the investment fund and not for the directors of the management company of the investment fund. And there is a big difference between the two. That it was the VAT treatments applicable for the resident. If you are non-resident, what are the rules? And of course, if you are non-resident, you are not going to ask a VAT registration in Luxembourg. You have no permanent establishment in that case. And the obligation to ask for VAT registrations will depend on your own country rules. Then some countries will consider that this is an activity outside the scope of the VAT, because VAT, this is EU law, but we see, and clearly when we see the different cases at the European Court of Justice, we see that there are a lot of different approaches in the application of the VAT treatment within the different EU countries. Then maybe that you will not be obliged to ask for VAT registration, but it does not mean that in fact your services will not be subject to VAT. Why? Because in that case, then the persons which will be liable to VAT, assuming that this is a VAT payer, which is normally most of the case, except if this is a pure holding entities without financing activities and so on. In that case, it will be then to the company, the Luxembourg entity paying your remuneration, then this is up to them to assess your services to the correct VAT treatment. Okay, maybe I continue to explain, after that I will answer to the different questions. Then it means that in that case, you will issue the invoice, or maybe that you will use a self-billing invoice at the level of the Luxembourg entities. And this is them, the company, which will apply then the VAT based on the reverse charge mechanism. And in that case, it will be the 17%, except again, if this is an investment fund for which we could invoke, in fact, the VAT exemptions related to the management of investment funds. One last point, which is important, and last point, the small enterprise regime is not applicable for the non-resident directors. Then it means that even though then your turnover will be below the 35,000 euro, the VAT will be due if there is no exemption applicable. Then it was very quickly then the summary of the VAT treatment. I know that this is not always easy then to know if you apply the correct rule, but it's like that. Maybe I'm going to have a look then to the different questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laurence. That's indeed a good summary of the different obligations. I see here a detailed question, which is whether a director needs to charge VAT for a financial institution located on North Africa.
Do I charge VAT for located in North Africa? In that case, then the financial institutions are in North Africa, then they are not in Luxembourg. Then it means that in principle, the services that you are going to render, the place of taxation is not in Luxembourg, but will be in North Africa. And you will not charge the Luxembourg VAT on that type of entity, even though they are, I would say, non-VAT payer, because this is outside, in fact, than the Luxembourg scope of the VAT, because we consider that this is an intellectual services. When you say director fees, do you mean tantième in French? Yes, correct. Then this is what we call tantième in French. It's true that in some case, I see as well then some directors which will issue then invoices mentioning services, then anyway services, it's clear that it falls within the scope of the VAT, and the VAT treatment just described will be applicable. But tantiem, then it means indeed that this is as well within the scope of the VAT since 2017. What about if the independent is also reverse charge? I'm not sure that I understand correctly, because to be reverse charged, then it means that you receive services in that case from someone which is not in Luxembourg. That I'm not sure that I understand correctly the question. Maybe if you can precise exactly I would say the detail of the transactions, it will be maybe clearer. To be different for a non-executive, even the status of a frontalier. Then the frontalier then will be considered as a non-resident. And in that case, it's true that we will apply for the reverse charge mechanism as explained then for the status of non-resident directors. Then it will be up to the company which will pay, in fact, the tantiem and the director fees, which will need to assess correctly the VAT treatment. Laurence, your mic is on your right.
Now, Laurence, I see here that RC means responsible de control for AML, so not the reverse charge. The question,
okay.
What about if the dependent director is also responsible for the control for AML?
And that the Luxembourg VAT authorities clearly mentioned that if, of course, it's not remunerated by a director fees, it's a salary, and assuming that, of course, it's a salary in that case, and fine, it's outside the scope. But if you receive a tantiem or a director fees for that, then they said that, in fact, this is another activities, and in that case, the director fees should follow then the rule just explained and before.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure whether we also already answered the question of Tom Seal with tantiem, as if the survey participants routinely deduct withholding tax from their invoices. And I believe indeed that was a question in the survey. I don't know, Laurence or Jean-Pascal, whether you could answer that question.
When you say deduct withholding tax to calculate the VAT or not? Because then the withholding tax are included in the taxable basis for VAT purposes. Then it means that it will be the gross director fees, including the withholding tax, which will be subject to VAT, and not the net, that after deduction of the withholding tax, then the taxable basis, it's the amount gross, including tax, withholding tax. I don't know if it answered to the question.
And there is indeed a separate chapter on the withholding tax on directors' fees in the survey. That was indeed a separate question, where, if I see it correctly, it says if your director's fees are invoiced via company, do you apply withholding tax? 40% of the participants answers with yes, and 60% answers with no. Thank you very much for your explanations, Laurence. So if we see in the survey also that only 54% of the directors residing in Luxembourg charges VAT on the services, is that, what do you think is the explanation for that?
Then if only then a small percentage, when I say a small percentage, then charge the VAT then to the services that they provide, this is in fact probably if they are resident, then this is because we have then the VAT exemptions for the management of investment funds, which is a big part of the industry in Luxembourg, or in some case, it might be as well then the small enterprise regime, which might be indeed an explanation. But it's not because they do not comply to the VAT rule.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. And also, if I see that only 23% of the companies proceed to the reverse charge of VAT. What would that mean then, that it's such a small percentage actually?
Again, then the explanations would be that because those enterprises are qualified vehicle for the VAT exemptions for their management, then it could be CCAF, it could be then this UCITS, CCAR, IF, it might be an explanation. Or if they are non-VAT payer, then what is a non-VAT payer? Then this is probably mainly a pure holding entity. And in that case, when I say pure holding entities, it means an entity which will only, the only activities will be then to hold participations and nothing else. And in that case, the rule applicable will not be the Luxembourg one, but it will be the rule applicable in the country of the residence of the directors. And as we explained then before, then in some countries, then they consider that this is outside the scope of the VAT, and VAT is not applicable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. And indeed, ILA has for a long time argued that it is not correct application of VAT to impose VAT on directors' fees. There's also a question from our participants in the coffee chat asking, she heard recently that the tax authorities might be considering a change of mind and may withdraw it. Do you have any update on that?
I know that some people then had contact with the VAT authorities and wrote letter then explaining, because there are a recent Court of Justice case which is not really clear, because it's not because this is a Dutch case, but when I talk with my Dutch colleagues, they said that it's a very specific case and could not be generally transposed then to the common situation. Anyway, that being said, then the directors, and this is an official, of course, discussion, then they said that they are not going to change their mind on that. Then they issue a circular, and for them, they consider that it is applicable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, thank you
but
very much.
But it's an informal communication, of course. Huh?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And there's one question of the participants asking which survey referred to. We are referring to the survey which the ILA has made this year for the third time together with KPMG on the remuneration of non-executive directors. The survey is not yet published, but will be published today on the website of the ILA for members of the ILA. So that's where you can find more wide information, and this is just an introduction and a sneak preview of the survey that we are giving you today in this call. There's another question on withholding tax. Do we have to apply withholding tax on invoices issued by a service company providing directors to clients? I don't know whether, Laurence, you can also help us with that question.
I should ask probably to one of my colleagues, because this is not directly related to the VAT as such.
Yeah. What we can do also is we can take the question outside of the coffee chat and come back to it later on. Shall we do that? That's maybe a good idea in this site. I have also a few questions to Gabriela. Gabriela, as you see with the Korn Ferry, both in Luxembourg and more wider on an international level, with recruitment of directors and also, directors' fees that are then offered. Can you tell us maybe a little bit on what are the factors that influence the level of directors' fees in different companies?
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this coffee chat. I think that there are three kind of factors that really influence on the fees. There are first company-specific factors, obviously the size, the nature, but also the profitability of the business. Also the complexity of the operations, the geographic spread, the lines of business, the industry sector. We all know that in the financial sector, the fees are higher, sometimes a lot higher than in industrial sector. Also, the structure and also the responsibilities of the board, including the number of board committees that they have. And last but not least, the risks and the challenges of the business. For example, I recruited last year 2 non-executive directors for a Bitcoin company, and of course the remuneration was quite high because of the sector of the company. There are also the director-specific factors, which are obviously the qualification, the experience, and the expertise of the person. The time commitment is one of the factors, or it should be one of the important factors. The general performance of the person, if the person is an older member of the board. Usually boards are assessed every 1 or 2 years. And also the person's involvement in value-added decision making. And obviously the additional responsibilities that are the chair of a committee or other special duties, for example, doing a takeover of the company. But I think that one factor which is really important, and sometimes it tends to be the most important one, is really the business and the economic conditions that depends sometimes a lot of the country where the board is situated.
Mm-hmm. And are there also principles that you would say could be applied to the level and the structure of independent directors' fees, irrespective of the country?
Yes, certainly. I think that in a perfect world, fees should reflect the time that directors spend on the board work. Because if the fees do not reflect the time, the directors would find better things to do with their time. So it's obvious. But in practice, I would say this is not always the case. And we see that larger and more complex companies are paying a little bit more, also because directors need more time to spend working for the board. Also, in a perfect world, fees should reflect the level of responsibility that the director has. Directors of public companies, for example, have wider responsibilities. And regulated industries, especially financial services, place a lot of more responsibilities on directors. But I think that the most important thing that has to be there, irrespective of the country, is that the fees should not compromise the independence of the directors. So I think that fee levels should not be so high that independent non-executive directors would be hesitant to challenge major stakeholders. I think that in exceptional circumstances, these kind of directors have to be prepared to resign. I remember Korn Ferry organized a board conference last year, and one of the questions was, so one of the participants said that he was a member of board of a subsidiary of an international company in Luxembourg. And his question was, what should he do when the interests of the Luxembourg subsidiary go against the interest of the mother company, which is international. And I think that the response and the answer is be prepared to resign. It's very clear that you have to keep your values and your independence. And therefore, in order to keep the independence, I think that the fees paid by one company should not be the primary source of income for a non-executive director. And also, the manner in which fees are paid should not compromise or even be perceived as compromising the independent oversight and judgment of the director. And I think about, for example, companies that pay a certain part of fees in shares.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, we have a question here of the participants. How do participants assess their level, and more particularly for SPVs included in a regulated complex structure, and that the fees there are fair and not under or overestimated?
Well, I think that the only way to benchmark, I would say, would be to benchmark. And the benchmark is, I think that you can benchmark against the same kind of position and the same kind of company that you are serving in. So also another way of benchmarking is in terms of time spent. But what I would say is that in a perfect world, time would be the main criteria. In the real world, time is not the main criteria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, although indeed you're saying time, but I believe that responsibility, liability is of course also a very important part, especially as indeed being a board member becomes more and more really a serious job, and there of course that is also an important factor. But you mentioned indeed time. The time is an important factor. Now in the survey which we saw, we've also asked the number of hours which board members spend annually on their mandate, and the outcome is that normal board members spend approximately on average 54 hours per year on their board mandate, and the chairperson 71 hours per year. And for board committees, an ordinary member would spend 36 hours per year, and the chair 52 hours. Now, if you hear these numbers, so 54, 71 for board membership, is that, if you see that internationally, are you surprised by the outcome, or is that in line with other countries, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I would see that as being in the European median of time spent in working for a board. I think that as we see more and more regulation, I think that this time will dramatically increase in the next years. And I also have data about, for example, the UK and also the US, where the level of time spent can go up to 200 hours a year for a chair, for example, and around 100 for a regular member of the board. And what I was saying earlier, that in a perfect world, time should be in at least proportional with the remuneration. It's not really the case in the reality, because I see that in reality, fees depend rather of the market and of its practices than of the effective time spent by directors. For example, the median basic fee in Europe is 70,000 euros for a simple board member. And we have a lot of disparities between countries, with Austria, which is the lowest, where a regular director earns 20,000 euros. And Switzerland, where regular directors earn 220,000 euros. And for example, in the UK, the median is 78,000 euros. So it's obvious that at the European level, the fee is not proportional with the time spent, because I don't believe that an Austrian director is working three times less than a director in Switzerland. And I think that when we are talking about non-executive chairs, the difference is even more dramatic. We have, for example, a non-executive chair in Austria earning 40,000 euros a year, where in Switzerland is they earn 1,300,000 euros. So it's 32 times more. And I really believe that they do not work 32 times more than Austrian chairs.
True, and that's an interesting fact. If you are, if you would have companies that are looking for directors also outside their country, so and also thinking of Luxembourg, which is a very international market, I can imagine that that is an interesting challenge. If a company in Luxembourg wants to take on a director from Austria, a board member from the UK, and a board member from Switzerland, that can be interesting discussions on the different directors' remunerations or directors' fees.
Yeah, in general, I think that the fees are determined by the location of the company, rather than the location of the director, because otherwise it would be discrimination.
Correct. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And there's another question coming up from our participants asking whether there's any extra remuneration for the board member who is responsible for compliance, the AML compliance officer in the market. And that's, again, I guess, mainly Luxembourg financial services industry board members, where you have this specific responsibility. Do you see that, Gabriela? Do you have any idea on that? Or
in my experience, no, there is no difference.
Okay, yeah, okay. And I see another question here, whether there's additional remuneration for committees. Yes, that is indeed also a question which has been asked in the survey and which is treated indeed. Another question, maybe more international again. Gabriela, how does the director's liability regime of the board location influence the remuneration? I'm not sure whether that is indeed also a factor which you could say is a reason for the remuneration, although I would not see that director's liability in Switzerland is much higher than in Austria, for instance, but
no,
I don't know.
In my experience, it's not about the liability regime. It's more about the practice of the market. As you said, in Switzerland, directors are not more liable than in Austria. So it's really about how the market, what are the practices of the market.
Yeah, and indeed, and rather a question, maybe also a remark, is the CSSF and the ECB are limiting the number of mandates that directors can take. And the question is there a tendency for directors to drop smaller mandates so that they have the time left to accept less mandates but better paid mandates?
I'm not sure that this is a general trend. I have spoke to some directors who, who are very demanded, and of course they tend to drop lesser paid mandates. But I would not say this is a general trend in Luxembourg. But I think as a general matter, from my perspective, I think that it's what is more important than fees in a mandate is really the intellectual challenge, and also the added value that someone can bring to a board. I think that money should be important, of course, because an appropriate level of fees is important. But on a long-term run, the intellectual challenge is important, not only for the person in itself, but also because when you have interesting mandates, you are doing really, you have a influence on the strategy of the company. And it's easier to progress, and it's easier also to be chosen for more and more interesting mandates in the future, because you can prove that you have experience with real companies, real strategies, and in a long-term basis, I think it's more interesting to to have this kind of mandates than to look only at the fees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you on that indeed. Maybe just to go to a slightly different topic, but a topic that we also took with us in the survey, and that's the topic of diversity. We have also asked, first of all, the participants to the survey, of course, what their gender is, and also then the participants on the independent director side, and also the companies. And the outcome of the survey is that 83% of the board members are men and 17% are women. It reflects a little bit, or at least the participants' percentages, the membership of the ILA also. But Gabriela, do you see in other countries the same percentages of men and women on boards, or is there a difference in other countries from Luxembourg?
I would say that there is a difference, and Luxembourg is rather on the lower side. And I'm referring here to a Korn Ferry survey that was realized in 2018. We have every year a survey on remuneration fees. The latest one in 2019 is being done today, so I cannot have the latest data, but in 2018, at the European level, 32% of the board members, of all board members were women, and 68% men. And Luxembourg was not part of that survey, but the lowest score at the time was Austria, where we had 18% women and 82% men. So Luxembourg is lower than Austria. I think that in the last years, we have definitely seen progress in Europe regarding the number of women on boards. I would say one of the countries that progressed the most was France, where we had in 2018 45% women and 55% men, up from 40% in 2017 because of binding registration. But the highest progression was in Italy, where we don't have any binding registration. And in Italy, in 2018, there were 37% women, up for, I would say, 20% a few years earlier. Yeah, we see a trend of hiring more women on European boards. Some countries are progressing very quickly, others less quickly, but the trend is there. So I hope it will also come in Luxembourg too.
Mm-hmm. And on the part of the remuneration, any difference there between female and male board members?
Yes, at the European level, the European median is 6% more fees for men than for women. We have two countries where we have the same level of fees, which are Spain and Norway. So Norway is a little bit normal because it's a northern country, but Spain, it's a very good surprise. And I think that in Spain, we really see that the diversity is really working, and it is really becoming almost a reality. And the highest gap in pay, we can see it in Germany, where we have 21% of difference in fees between men and women. But I think that what is most important here is not that I don't think that there is a discrimination against women, which can be very bizarre. It's also, I think, that the gap appears mainly due to the underrepresentation of women on the strategically important board committees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For example, at the European level, 92% of the non-executive chairs are men versus 8% women. And for the deputy chair, we have 82% male versus 18% women. And we also have, for example, we have realized a study on the committees without any female member at the European level. And we have found out that 24% of all European audit committees do not have a female member. 29% of the remuneration committees do not have a female member, and 20% of the risk committees. So we see that the gap is really, I think, provoked by the level of responsibility.
Yeah, interesting. Well, thank you very much, Gabriela, for your interesting contribution, also for putting indeed for giving us a little bit the international context for this survey of remuneration. So thank you very much for that. A big thank you also to Laurence and Jean-Pascal and to KPMG in general for the enormous work that you've done again for this survey, which is, well, every few years when we do again, it's an enormous work, and we try to also improve it every time. So that means that there are a little bit changes every time. And I really hope that indeed next time when we will do the survey, we will have even more participants again in the survey, because the more participants we have, of course, the more representative the survey is. I hope that we have given you a little bit, well, warming up to read this survey. So please have a look on the ILA site and read the entire outcome of the survey. And if there are other ideas which you would have for the next time that we do the survey or other things, then please send me an email. We will try to take it into account for the next survey. And well, thank you very, very much to our panelists of today for the interesting contributions which you have given. And Laurence, I saw that many of the questions were VAT or tax related. So I believe that maybe that might be another interesting topic for ILA to do more coffee chats or other presentations on. Next week there will be another presentation of the ILA on a coffee chat, this time managing the current challenges in illiquid funds, which I guess for many of independent directors in Luxembourg is also a very interesting topic. So please join us again next week for the next coffee chat. And thank you very much for everybody for joining us today and for your interesting questions and having this chat with us. Thank you very much.